Welcome to the Stoic Storyteller, your sanctuary for raw, unfiltered stories about the darker side of human nature. Here, we dive deep into the reality of life, the toxic relationships, the bitter betrayals, and the quiet, calculating art of absolute justice.
Is blood really thicker than water? Today's story follows an adopted son who was cast out into the cold so the Apos, rightful and Apos, heirs could take the throne. But when those spoiled biological children burned their father and Apos' billionaire empire to the ground, the exiled son was the only one with the power to buy the ashes. Prepare yourself for a story of ultimate vindication. Let Apos' begin. I still remember the smell of St. Jude's orphanage. It was a permanent, suffocating blend of cheap bleach, boiled cabbage, and damp wood. I was 12 years old. A quiet boy who had learned early on that invisibility was the best defense against a cruel world. But on a freezing Tuesday in November, I couldn't and Apos' be invisible. A sleek, black Rolls-Royce pulled into the muddy courtyard, looking like an alien spaceship amidst the decaying brick walls. Out stepped Arthur Sterling. He didn't and Apos' walk. He glided, commanding the space around him with a terrifying, silent authority. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit, and his eyes, a piercing icy blue, scanned the line of orphans like a wealthy man inspecting racehorses before an auction. The matron pushed me forward. My worn-out sneakers squeaked against the linoleum. Arthur didn't and Apos' asked about my dreams, my hobbies, or my favorite color. He looked at my file, noting my perfect test scores and the remarks about my stoic, unproblematic behavior. You and Apos' smart, Arthur said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in my chest. Are you hungry, boy? Yes, sir, I replied, keeping my eyes on his polished Italian leather shoes. Good. Hunger makes a man work. Satisfaction makes him weak. He turned to the matron. I and Apos' take this one. I wasn't and Apos' adopted. I was acquired. During the silent, 2-hour drive to the Sterling estate, sitting in the sprawling leather back seat, I naively thought I was finally getting a family. I thought I would have a father to play catch with, a mother to bake me cookies, and siblings to share secrets with. I didn't and Apos' realize until the massive wrought iron gates of the Sterling mansion slowly creaked open, revealing a terrifyingly massive stone estate, that I wasn't and Apos' being brought into a home. I was being deployed into a war zone, and I was the weapon. The foyer of the Sterling mansion was larger than my entire orphanage. It was a cathedral of wealth, soaring ceilings, a massive crystal chandelier that fractured the light into 1,000 blinding shards, and a sweeping marble staircase. Standing at the base of those stairs were my new family. Eleanor, Arthur, and Apos' wife, stood with her hands clasped elegantly in front of her. She offered me a smile, but it didn't and Apos' reach her eyes. It was the kind of polite, frozen smile one gives to a stray dog that wandered onto a manicured lawn. Behind her stood the biological heirs to the Sterling Empire. Victoria, 16, looked down at me from the third step. She had her father's icy eyes and a posture so rigid it looked painful. She didn't and Apos' say a word, but her stare explicitly communicated one thing. You do not belong here, and you never will. Chloe, 14, barely glanced up from her diamond-encrusted smartphone. She wrinkled her nose, looking at my faded jeans and oversized sweater. Ugh, Dad, she whined, her voice dripping with extreme privilege. Does he have to stand on the imported rug? He smells like a hospital. And then there was Julian, 12 years old, exactly my age, the golden boy, the only biological son. He walked slowly down the stairs, his hands in the pockets of his tailored slacks. He stopped right in front of me, leaning in close so only I could hear. My dad bought you to do my homework? Orphan, Julian whispered, a vicious smirk playing on his lips. Touch my things, look at me wrong, and I and Apos' I'll have you thrown back into the gutter by tomorrow morning. Arthur clapped his hands, the sharp sound echoing off the marble. Children, meet your new brother. He will be attending your academy starting Monday. Show him his room. They didn't in Oppos. T show me the family wing. Instead, a silent butler led me down a long, narrow corridor to a small guest room near the servant and Oppos' quarters. It was cold, empty, and perfectly devoid of love. I sat on the edge of the stiff, immaculate bed, listening to the distant, muffled laughter of my new siblings echoing through the mansion. I pulled my knees to my chest. I finally understood why I was here. I was the dirt brought in to make the gold shine brighter. But they had underestimated one thing: dirt can bury you. It took exactly 6 months for the mansion to turn from a cold house into a psychological slaughterhouse. Dinner at the Sterling estate was a formal, terrifying affair. Every evening at 7 p.m. sharp, we sat at a mahogany table long enough to seat 20 people. The silence was only broken by the clinking of silver cutlery against fine china. It was midterm report card day. I had kept my head down, burying myself in textbooks to escape the constant, daily torments from Julian and the icy exclusion from the sisters. Arthur sat at the head of the table. He didn't in Oppos to eat. He held the thick, cream-colored envelopes containing our grades. He opened Julian and Oppos' first. The silence stretched, pulling tight like a piano wire. A and Oppos winking and laughing and Oppos in mathematics. A and Oppos. C and Oppos. In literature, Arthur read, his voice dangerously quiet. He looked at Julian, whose arrogant smirk had instantly melted into pale fear. You are my blood, Julian. You are the heir to a billion-dollar empire. And you are being outsmarted by a boy I picked up from a charity ward. Arthur threw my report card onto the center of the table. It slid to a stop right in front of Julian. It was a straight line of perfect A and Oppos. Look at it, Arthur commanded, slamming his fist onto the table, making the crystal water glasses shake. He has nothing. No name, no bloodline, no trust fund. Yet he works while you play. If you don and Oppos, find your spine, Julian, I will give your inheritance to him. My stomach plummeted. I looked at Arthur, horrified. I didn't and Oppos. Want his money. I didn't and Oppos. Want his empire. I just wanted peace. But Arthur wasn't and Oppos. Looking at me. He was watching Julian, using my hard work as a whip to lash his biological son. Victoria glared at me with pure venom. Chloe scoffed and rolled her eyes. But Julian's face twisted into an ugly, demonic mask of pure hatred. He didn't and Oppos. Hate his father for the abuse. He hated me for existing. That night, when I returned to my room, the door was ajar. My few belongings were scattered across the floor. My textbooks were ripped. But the true devastation lay on my pillow. Before she died, my biological mother had given me a cheap, wooden music box. It was the only physical proof I had that someone, somewhere, had once loved me. It was smashed to pieces, crushed into splinters. Julian stood in the hallway, leaning against the doorframe, admiring his work. I told you, Julian sneered, his eyes dark and empty. You and Oppos. Just a stray dog. And in this house, dogs sleep outside. I knelt on the floor, gathering the broken wooden pieces of the music box into my trembling hands. A hot, burning tear slipped down my cheek, but I didn't and Oppos. Make a sound. I didn't and Oppos. Scream. I didn't and Oppos. Run to Arthur to report him. In that agonizing silence, a boy died, and a strategist was born. I realized that reacting would only give them power. My intellect wasn't and Oppos. Just a way to pass the time anymore. It was my armor, my weapon, and my ultimate ticket out of this hell. The next 4 years were a masterclass in psychological endurance. High school for the Sterling children was a playground of excess, parties, and social dominance. For me, it was a solitary confinement. Julian made sure I was entirely ostracized. If anyone dared to speak to me, Julian's clique would immediately target them. I ate lunch alone in the library every single day. Victoria, preparing for her Ivy League business degrees, realized she could use me. One evening, she cornered me in the mansion and Oppos. massive library. She dropped a stack of complex macroeconomics assignments onto my desk. "Do these," she commanded, filing her manicured nails. "Make sure they look like my writing style. If you don an Oppos, I and Oppos, tell father I caught you stealing from mother and Oppos. Jewelry box. Who do you think he and Oppos? Believe." I looked up at her cold, calculating eyes. I knew she wasn't an Oppos. Bluffing. So I did her assignments. I did Chloe and Oppos' history papers so she could attend her fashion shows. I absorbed their abuse, their threats, and their endless demands. I became a ghost in the mansion, a silent machine that processed their academic burdens while they bathed in luxury. They thought they had broken me. They thought I was subservient. They didn't in Oppos. Realized I was studying them. By doing their work, I learned exactly how their minds operated. I learned Victoria's rigid, inflexible approach to problem solving. I saw Chloe's complete lack of analytical skills, and I watched Julian cheat his way through life, relying entirely on fear and money rather than competence. I knew their weaknesses better than they knew themselves. On the day the college acceptance letters arrived, the mansion was buzzing. Victoria was demanding a new sports car for getting into Wharton, thanks to the essays I wrote. Julian was throwing a tantrum because his father had to make a massive donation just to get him into a second-tier state school. I quietly slipped out the back door, carrying a single, thin envelope. I walked to the edge of the estate, where the manicured lawns met the wild, untamed forest. I sat on a cold stone bench and opened the letter. Harvard University. Full merit scholarship. I didn't in Oppos. Need Arthur in Oppos. Money. I didn't in Oppos. Need the sterling name. I looked back at the towering, oppressive silhouette of the mansion against the twilight sky. For 6 years, I had survived in the Lion and Oppos' den. Now the gates were finally opening. I packed my bags that very night. I didn't in Oppos. Say goodbye to Victoria, Chloe, or Julian. I left a brief note of gratitude on Arthur and Oppos' desk, thanking him for the roof over my head. As the taxi pulled away from the estate at dawn, I didn't in Oppos. Looked back in the rearview mirror. I thought I was leaving the Sterling family behind forever. I thought I had finally won my freedom. I had no idea that the true war for the empire hadn't in Oppos even begun. Boston in the winter was unforgiving, the freezing winds coming off the Charles River cutting straight to the bone. But to me, my cramped, drafty dorm room at Harvard felt like an absolute paradise. It was the first space in my life that truly belonged to me. While I was surviving on instant coffee, reading corporate law textbooks until my eyes bled, and working night shifts at the campus library, news from the Sterling family occasionally filtered through the media. The biological heirs were busy tearing the empire apart from the inside. Victoria, armed with an Ivy League degree she had barely earned, grew impatient. She couldn't and Oppos. Stand being under Arthur and Oppos' shadow for another day. She threw a spectacular tantrum in the executive boardroom, demanding a massive, premature release of her trust fund. Arthur, perhaps exhausted by her relentless aggression, caved. Victoria took her millions and founded a bespoke logistics firm. She bought an entire floor of a skyscraper before she even had her first client. Obsessed with the image of being a self-made CEO, Chloe took a different, far more public route of embarrassment. Deciding that business was too boring, she bought her way into the music industry. Arthur's money hired top-tier producers to auto-tune her weak voice and bought millions of fake digital streams to push her manufactured debut single onto the charts. I remember walking past a newsstand in Harvard Square and seeing her face on a tabloid cover, dripping in diamonds, titled, "The Next Pop Princess?" And Julian did absolutely nothing. He dropped out of his state college after 2 semesters, retreating to the mansion. He spent his days sleeping off hangovers and his nights crashing Arthur's collection of imported sports cars. He was simply waiting for his father to die so he could inherit the throne. They were all building castles on sand, completely oblivious to the rising tide. I watched them from afar, feeling a strange mix of pity and relief. They were no longer my problem, or so I thought, because the foundation of the Sterling Empire was beginning to crack, and the tremors were about to reach all the way to Boston. For 4 years, I stripped the name Sterling from my identity. To my professors and peers, I was just a quiet, intensely focused student who never spoke of his family. I didn't end Oppos. T just study finance. I dissected it. I found a mentor in a ruthless, brilliant professor of economics who recognized my hunger. Under his brutal guidance, I began quietly day trading with the meager savings I had scraped together. I turned hundreds into thousands, and thousands into a formidable private portfolio. I was building my own fortress, brick by silent brick. By my senior year, I was fielding lucrative offers from Wall Street's most aggressive hedge funds. I was finally ready to step into the sun and claim a life entirely of my own making. It was a Tuesday night, 2 weeks before my graduation. The snow was falling heavily outside my apartment window. I was reviewing a complex merger contract for a final exam when my phone rang. It was 3:14 a.m. I didn't in Oppos. T recognized the number, but something in my gut twisted. I picked it up. Hello? There was no arrogant demand, no sneering insult. Instead, I heard the sound of a woman crying. Real, ragged, terrified sobs. Took me a moment to recognize the voice. It was Eleanor Sterling. He and Oppos. Dying. She choked out, her voice trembling violently. Arthur had a massive heart attack. The doctors say he might not make it through the night. And the company, Julian has no idea what he and Oppos doing. Please, you have to come back. I sat in the dark, the glow of my laptop illuminating my face. The man who had bought me to torture his children was dying. I owed him nothing. I had every right to hang up the phone, block the number, and let the Sterling Corporation burn to the ground. But as I closed my eyes, I remembered the freezing orphanage, and the man who, for all his cruel methods, had given me the key to escape it. I closed my laptop. The exile was over. I walked into the intensive care unit at 6 a.m. The sterile, humming machines were keeping Arthur Sterling alive. The terrifying titan of industry looked impossibly small and fragile in the hospital bed. His skin the color of ash. Eleanor sat beside him, looking aged and broken. But it was the scene in the hospital hallway that truly revealed the disaster at hand. Julian was pacing frantically, wearing a wrinkled, $1,000 suit. He looked like a frightened child. He was surrounded by 3 panicked senior executives from the Sterling Corporation. "We are bleeding capital, Julian," one of the executives pleaded. "The news of your father and Oppos' stroke leaked. Rival firms are initiating a hostile takeover. The board needs a stabilizing statement from you right now. Idon and Oppos." "Tino!" Julian screamed, running his hands through his hair. "Tell them to wait. Tell them my dad will be fine." He was completely, utterly useless. The empire was under siege, and the crown prince was crying in the hallway. I stepped out of the shadows. My footsteps echoed sharply against the linoleum floor. Julian stopped pacing. He looked at me, his eyes widening in shock, and then immediately narrowing into that familiar, venomous hatred. "What are you doing here? Come to beg for a spot in the will before he dies?" I ignored him entirely. I turned to the senior executive, recognizing him from Arthur and Oppos' old files. "Mr. Vance, have our lawyers draft a poison pill defense immediately to dilute the hostile shares. Freeze all liquid assets in the European branches, and schedule an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. I will chair it." Vance looked at me, stunned by the absolute authority in my voice. He looked at Julian, who was sputtering in outrage, and then back at me. Vance nodded. "Yes, sir. You can and Oppos." "Do that," Julian yelled, stepping into my path, his face red with rage. "You and Oppos. Ria nobody. I am the CEO right now. I am the blood heir." I looked down at Julian. I was no longer the frightened, silent 12-year-old boy he used to bully. I was taller, broader, and armed with a lethal intellect. "You are a liability, Julian," I said, my voice dangerously calm, devoid of any emotion. Your father and Appo's legacy is burning while you panic in a hallway. Go home. Let the adults work. I walked past him, leaving him standing there in impotent rage. I stepped into the boardroom an hour later, facing a table of terrified wolves. By noon, I had stopped the bleeding. I had taken the throne. But I knew Julian Wooden and Appo's just walk away. I had wounded his pride in front of the executives. He was going to strike back. To everyone in Appo's shock, Arthur survived. 2 months later, he was discharged, though he was permanently weakened, confined to a wheelchair, and forbidden from returning to the high-stress environment of the office. He watched from his study in the mansion as I took the reins as acting chief operating officer. For the next 6 months, I worked 100-hour weeks. I untangled the disastrous financial messes Julian had quietly made, fired the incompetent managers he had hired, and aggressively secured massive contracts that stabilized the company's stock. I bled for the Sterling Corporation. One evening in late November, almost exactly 10 years after I had first arrived at the estate, Arthur summoned me to his private study. The fire was crackling in the hearth. Arthur sat in his leather chair, a blanket draped over his frail legs. He poured 2 glasses of 20-year-old Macallan Scotch and pushed one across the heavy oak desk toward me. "Drink," he said softly. I took a sip. The silence between us was different now. It wasn't Appo's. The oppressive, terrifying silence of my childhood. It was heavy with unspoken truths. Arthur looked at me, his icy blue eyes softened by age and proximity to death. I watched the board meeting tapes. Arthur said, his voice a raspy whisper, "You saved my life and Appo's work. Without you, we would be bankrupt, and Julian would likely be in jail for corporate negligence." "It and Appo's my job, sir," I replied formally. Arthur shook his head slowly. A look of profound, agonizing regret crossed his face. "I brought you here as a tool. I treated you like a hunting dog, meant to scare my children into running faster. I was a brilliant businessman, but I was a horrific father." He reached across the desk, his trembling, liver-spotted hand resting over mine. It was the first time in 10 years he had ever touched me with warmth. "Victoria is arrogant. Chloe is a fool. And Julian is a monster of my own making," Arthur whispered, a tear escaping his eye and disappearing into his wrinkles. "But you have my mind, and you have a heart I never possessed. You are my true son. I see that now. I am so sorry it took me dying to realize it. For the first time since my biological mother passed away, I felt the walls around my heart crack." I squeezed his hand back. I finally had a father. We sat there for hours, talking not about margins or hostile takeovers, but about life, regrets, and the future. It was the most beautiful night of my life. But tragedy is a thief that strikes when you are most comfortable. As I walked out of Arthur's study late that night, feeling a profound sense of peace I didn't in Appo's, noticed the shadow lingering at the end of the dark hallway. Julian stood there, partially hidden behind a marble pillar. He had heard everything. He had heard his father call me his true son. I didn't in Appo's. See the psychotic, murderous glint in Julian and Appo's eyes. I didn't in Appo's. Know that tomorrow he would initiate a plan so vile, so perfectly destructive, that it would tear my newfound family to shreds and force me into exile once again. Julian Sterling did not sleep that night. He locked himself in his opulent suite, the heavy velvet curtains drawn shut against the morning sun. The words he had overheard in the study, "You are my true son," echoed in his mind like a death knell. For his entire life, Julian's only achievement, his only shield against his own glaring incompetence, was his bloodline. He was the biological heir. It was an absolute, divine right. But watching me stabilize the empire he had nearly destroyed, and hearing his father bestow the ultimate validation upon me, shattered his reality. Paranoia, cold and venomous, began to rot his mind. He stopped coming to the executive offices. Instead, he spent his days tracking my movements, obsessively reviewing my calendar, and bribing lower-level staff to report on my meetings. He saw the way the board members looked at me with immense respect. He saw Eleanor, his own mother, bringing me coffee in the mornings, her eyes filled with maternal warmth. He was being replaced, erased from his own dynasty. Julian knew with absolute certainty that if it came down to a battle of intellect, work ethic, or corporate strategy, I would slaughter him. He couldn't in Appos. T beat me in the light, so he dragged the war into the dark. He didn't in Appos. T have the brains to outmaneuver me, but he had the sterling name and he had access. Over the next 3 months, Julian became a ghost in the company's digital infrastructure. Using his executive clearance, he quietly blackmailed a senior IT director who had a severe gambling problem. Julian was building a guillotine, and I was entirely too focused on saving the company to hear the blade sharpening in the background. It happened on a rainy Tuesday in early March. The company was finally out of the red, and I had just finalized a massive multi-million-dollar acquisition of a European tech firm. The board was ecstatic. I was sitting in my office, reviewing the final contracts, when the glass doors were suddenly shoved open. 4 men in dark suits walked in. They were and Appos, T board members. They were from an elite external forensic accounting firm. Behind them stood Julian, flanked by the company's lead legal counsel and 2 burly security guards. Julian's face was a mask of perfectly manufactured grief, but his eyes were dancing with manic, triumphant glee. "Step away from the computer," the lead accountant ordered, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of my office. "What is the meaning of this?" I demanded, standing up. Julian stepped forward, holding a thick, red folder. He looked at the legal counsel and sighed heavily, playing the role of the heartbroken brother to perfection. "We trusted you. My father gave you everything, and you used your position to rob us blind." He threw the folder onto my desk. It landed with a heavy thud. I opened it. Inside were dozens of wire transfer logs, encrypted bank statements, and offshore account details. Over $30 million from our emergency reserve fund had been siphoned off over the past 3 months. The money had vanished through a labyrinth of shell companies in the Cayman Islands. But the most chilling part wasn't Appos, T the missing money. It was the digital footprint. Every single fraudulent transfer, every encrypted email, and every authorization signature bore my personal, highly secured executive ID. The IP addresses were traced directly to my private laptop and my office desktop. The paper trail was absolutely flawless. It was a masterpiece of corporate framing. "You set up a phantom ledger," Julian said loudly, making sure the security guards and the gathering crowd of employees outside my office could hear. "You were planning to bankrupt us and run." The auditors caught the final wire transfer this morning. I looked at Julian. I saw the slight, arrogant twitch of his upper lip. In that split second, I understood everything. The IT director's sudden resignation last week. Julian's late-night visits to the server room. He had used the man to clone my digital identity and drain the accounts, pinning the ultimate treason on my chest. "This is a fabrication," I said, my voice dangerously low. "You and I both know you engineered this, Julian." "Save it for the federal prosecutors," Julian sneered. "Security, escort him to the boardroom. The executives are waiting for an explanation." The trap had snapped shut, and it was made of steel. The atmosphere in the grand boardroom was suffocating. The board of directors, the men and women who had praised my brilliance just yesterday, now looked at me with disgust and betrayal. But the true horror was sitting at the head of the table. Arthur had insisted on being wheeled in when he heard the news. He looked terrible. His skin was gray, his breathing labored, and his hands trembled violently as he clutched the forged audit report. The stress of the betrayal was literally killing him. "Tell me it in Appos." "Es a lie," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. He looked up at me, his icy blue eyes shattered with heartbreak. "Tell me you didn't in Appos. T do this to our family." I opened my mouth to defend myself. I had already begun calculating how to trace the IP addresses back to Julian, how to subpoena the IT director, how to dismantle the frame job in a court of law. I could fight this. I could win. But as I looked at Arthur, a sharp, terrifying beeping sound interrupted my thoughts. Arthur gasped, clutching his chest. His heart monitor, attached to his wrist, spiked violently. Eleanor screamed, rushing to his side. The stress of the confrontation was triggering another cardiac event. The doctors had warned us that one more severe shock would be fatal. If I fought this, if I declared war on his biological son right here and now, the ensuing scandal, the public trial, and the revelation of Julian and Apos' true depravity would destroy the company and Apos' stock permanently. But more importantly, it would kill Arthur before the week was over. Julian knew this. He stood in the corner of the room, arms crossed, watching me with a sickeningly confident smirk. He had checkmated me. I had to choose between my own innocence and my father and Apos' life. I looked at Arthur, the man who had called me his true son. I remembered the warmth of his hand over mine. I swallowed the bitterest pill of my life. I closed my eyes, letting my reputation, my career, and my future burn to ash. I did it, I said. My voice was dead, echoing in the silent room. Eleanor sobbed. Arthur closed his eyes, a single tear rolling down his cheek as he slumped back into his wheelchair, the monitor slowly stabilizing as the argument ended. I wanted security, I lied, the words tasting like poison. I wanted what Julian had. I and Apos, LL sign whatever you want. Just keep it out of the courts. Julian's smile widened. He had won. He slammed a pre-drafted resignation and non-disclosure agreement onto the table. In exchange for my immediate silent departure and the forfeiture of all my assets and shares, the Sterling Corporation would not press federal charges. I signed the papers without reading them. I surrendered my security badge, my company phone, and the keys to my car. I walked out of the towering glass skyscraper with nothing but the clothes on my back and a cardboard box of personal items. It was raining. I stood on the pavement, looking up at the towering monolith of the Sterling Empire. I was exiled, branded a traitor, and cast back into the cold world. But as the rain washed over me, I made a silent vow. I wasn't an Apos' just going to survive. I was going to conquer. With me gone, Julian triumphantly ascended the throne. He was officially the undisputed CEO of the Sterling Corporation. There was no more shadow to stand in, no more stray dog to outshine him. But absolute power in the hands of an absolute fool is a ticking time bomb. Believing himself to be a visionary genius who had successfully ousted a corporate spy, Julian and Apos' arrogance exploded. He completely ignored the conservative, stabilizing strategies I had put in place. Instead, he wanted to make his mark. He wanted to be a celebrity CEO. The disaster was swift and total. In his first year, Julian liquidated our most stable real estate assets to fund a massive, high-risk venture in experimental crypto technology, an industry he knew absolutely nothing about. The venture collapsed within 8 months, wiping out 40% of the company and Apos' liquid capital. In his second year, he alienated the Sterling Corporation and Apos' oldest and most loyal international partners. He attended summit meetings drunk, insulted foreign dignitaries with his crass, frat boy humor, and demanded renegotiations of decades-old contracts purely to assert dominance. The partners walked away, taking their billions in contracts to our rivals. By his third year, the company was hemorrhaging money. To cover the massive losses and fund his continuing lavish lifestyle of private jets and Monte Carlo yacht parties, Julian began secretly taking out astronomical loans with toxic, predatory interest rates, using the company and Apos' remaining core assets as collateral. Victoria and Chloe, entirely absorbed in their own bubbles, didn't and Apos' noticed the smoke until the fire was already burning the roof. Arthur, kept heavily medicated and isolated in the mansion by Julian and Apos' orders, was fed forged, glowing financial reports to keep his heart calm. Julian thought he was playing a brilliant game of high-stakes gambling. He thought he could bluff his way out of a corporate death spiral. The illusion violently shattered on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 years after my exile. The stock market opened, and the news broke. A major investigative journalism firm published a devastating exposé on the Sterling Corporation and Apos' hidden debts and Julian and Apos' gross incompetence. Within minutes, the stock price plummeted in a catastrophic freefall. Panic consumed the skyscraper. Julian sat in his office, his face pale and sweating, watching the red lines on his trading monitors dive toward zero. The phones were ringing incessantly. Creditors were calling in their loans. The board of directors was demanding his immediate resignation. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of his office were pushed open. It wasn't and Appos, his security detail. It was a team of federal agents, followed by a swarm of bankruptcy lawyers representing the international banks. Julian Sterling, the lead agent, said, his voice cold and authoritative, "We are seizing this building, all corporate assets, and your personal accounts, effective immediately. The Sterling Corporation is officially in receivership." Julian dropped his crystal whiskey glass. It shattered on the floor, mirroring the empire around him. He had wanted the crown so desperately, without realizing that a crown without a foundation is just a heavy piece of metal that drags you down to the bottom of the ocean. The legacy of Arthur Sterling, built over 40 years of ruthless brilliance, had been completely annihilated by his biological son in 36 months. And the nightmare for the Sterling family was only just beginning. The death of an empire is not a quiet affair. It is a brutal public dismantling. Following Julian's catastrophic financial collapse, the federal bankruptcy courts showed absolutely no mercy. Because Julian had fraudulently used his parents' and Appos' personal assets to secure his toxic, predatory loans, the protective corporate veils were pierced. The banks didn't and Appos' just take the towering glass skyscrapers and the corporate jets. They came for everything. I wasn't and Appos' there to see it, but the news coverage painted a horrifyingly vivid picture. On a cold Thursday morning, federal marshals arrived at the Sterling family estate. The massive wrought iron gates, which had once felt like the impenetrable walls of a fortress, were locked open. Moving crews swarmed the mansion like ants on a dying carcass. They tagged the antique mahogany furniture, the crystal chandeliers, and Eleanor's priceless jewelry collection with neon auction stickers. Arthur Sterling, the man who had once terrified me with a single glance, sat in his wheelchair on the front lawn. His breathing was shallow, his icy blue eyes vacant as he watched a crew carry out the massive oil portrait of his family that used to hang in the grand foyer. Eleanor stood beside him, clutching two small, worn suitcases, the only possessions they were legally allowed to keep. Her designer coats were gone, replaced by a simple, thin wool sweater. She looked frail, her elegant posture shattered under the weight of absolute ruin. They had built a dynasty, and their biological son had burned it to ash in 3 short years. By nightfall, the gates of the estate were padlocked by the banks. The billionaire couple, now penniless, homeless, and stripped of their dignity, found themselves standing on the pavement. The world they had ruled had violently expelled them. But surely they thought their family would save them. They had 2 wealthy, successful daughters. They believed that in their darkest hour, blood would prove thicker than water. They were about to learn a devastating lesson about the children they had raised. With no money for a hotel and Arthur's medical needs becoming critical, Eleanor used the last few dollars in her purse to hail a cab to Victoria's corporate headquarters. Victoria's logistics firm was booming, operating out of a sleek, ultra-modern building downtown. Eleanor pushed Arthur's wheelchair into the pristine marble lobby, her clothes damp from the freezing rain. She approached the receptionist, explaining the emergency and begging to see her daughter. They waited for 2 agonizing hours. Finally, Victoria's executive assistant stepped out of the private elevator. She didn't Appos' offer a warm greeting. She looked at Arthur and Eleanor with barely concealed disdain. "Miss Sterling is extremely busy with a shareholder meeting," the assistant said coldly, handing Eleanor a plain white envelope. "She instructed me to give you this. She also asked that you do not return to the premises. The paparazzi are swarming the bankruptcy story, and your presence here is a severe liability to her brand and Appos' image." Eleanor opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were $200 bills and a sticky note with Victoria's elegant handwriting. "Don and Appos' dragged me down with Julian and Appos' mess. Figure it out." Eleanor choked back a sob. Her eldest daughter, whom they had pampered and funded, had just paid them $200 to disappear. Desperate, they spent 50 of those dollars on a cab to Chloe's luxury penthouse in the Arts District. Chloe was currently the internet and Oppo's favorite pop starlet, swimming in endorsement deals and diamond jewelry. When the doorman called up to the penthouse, the response was immediate. The doorman, looking deeply uncomfortable, relayed the message. Miss Chloe says she is currently in A and Oppo's creative zone and Oppo's, and cannot be disturbed by negative energy, the doorman recited, clearly embarrassed. She said her manager will wire you some money next week, but she cannot have homeless people lingering in the lobby. I have to ask you to leave. Arthur closed his eyes, his head falling back against his wheelchair. A low, agonizing groan escaped his lips. It wasn't Oppo's. The pain of his failing heart. It was the crushing, suffocating realization of his ultimate failure as a father. They had prioritized money, status, and image over character, empathy, and love. And now, starving in the cold rain, they were reaping exactly what they had sown. With no other options, the elderly couple was forced into the darkest, most miserable corner of the city. Julian, having managed to hide a tiny fraction of his liquid cash before the feds seized his accounts, had rented a filthy, cramped, two-bedroom apartment in a decaying building on the wrong side of the tracks. He was legally prohibited from leaving the state while the federal fraud investigations were ongoing. Arthur and Eleanor moved into the tiny second bedroom. It smelled of mold, and the radiator barely worked. But the physical conditions were nothing compared to the psychological torture of living with Julian. Julian had not been humbled by the loss of his empire. Instead, his arrogance had mutated into a toxic, violent victim complex. He refused to look for a job, claiming manual labor was beneath a sterling. Instead, he sat on a stained sofa all day, drinking cheap vodka and screaming at his parents. "This is your fault," Julian roared one evening, throwing a shattered glass against the wall, narrowly missing Eleanor. "You gave me the company too late. You didn't and Oppo's. Leave me enough liquid assets. If you had just trusted me, I could have saved it." He was a monster. When Arthur's meager Social Security and disability checks arrived, Julian would physically rip the envelopes from Eleanor and Oppo's hands, stealing the money they needed for Arthur's heart medication to buy himself expensive liquor and designer clothes to maintain his delusions of grandeur. Eleanor spent her days weeping silently in the cramped kitchen, rationing cans of soup so Arthur could eat. Arthur, confined to his wheelchair, deteriorated rapidly. He spent hours staring at the peeling wallpaper, whispering a single name into the dark, damp room. "My name." He realized, in the agonizing clarity of his suffering, that he had banished the only true son he ever had, sacrificing his most loyal child to protect a biological parasite that was now slowly bleeding him to death. I had not been idle during my 3 years of exile. When I walked out of the Sterling Corporation in the rain, taking the fall for Julian's crime, I didn't an Oppo's break. I used the pain as fuel. Moving to New York, I leveraged the quiet, massive private portfolio I had built during my college years. I founded Aegis Capital, an aggressive, highly analytical private equity firm. Free from the toxic drama of the Sterling family, my intellect was unleashed. Within 3 years, Aegis Capital had eclipsed the net worth of the old Sterling Corporation. I was a titan in my own right, operating from the shadows, entirely self-made. I had my intelligence division keep a very distant, discreet eye on Arthur. When the news of the bankruptcy hit, I immediately deployed my best private investigators to find them. It took them 3 weeks to locate Julian and Oppo's squalid apartment. When I read the report detailing the abuse, the stolen medication money, and the squalor they were living in, a cold, terrifying fury settled in my chest. It was a bleak Friday afternoon. Julian was sprawled on the rotting sofa, nursing a hangover, while Eleanor was trying to comfort a violently coughing Arthur in the freezing bedroom. Suddenly, the heavy roar of a V12 engine echoed through the narrow, trash-filled alleyway outside. Julian frowned, peering through the dirty blinds. A sleek, black, armored Maybach had just pulled up to the curb. 2 massive men in tailored suits stepped out, standing guard by the vehicle. Then the rear door opened. I stepped out onto the cracked pavement. I wore a bespoke navy suit, a platinum Patek Philippe on my wrist, and the unmistakable, terrifying aura of absolute power. Julian's face drained of all color. He backed away from the window, his hands trembling. I didn't inapos. Knock. I kicked the flimsy wooden door of the apartment so hard it splintered off its hinges, crashing to the floor. I walked into the living room. The smell of stale vodka and despair was suffocating. Julian pressed himself against the wall, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He thought I had come to exact my vengeance, to finally kill him for framing me. I didn't inapos to even look at him. He was a ghost to me. I walked straight past him and pushed open the bedroom door. Eleanor gasped, dropping the damp cloth she was using to cool Arthur's forehead. Arthur slowly opened his icy blue eyes. When he saw me standing there, a man completely transformed, radiating success and strength, he began to weep. It was a deep, guttural sound of a broken man finding salvation. I and Appos. Am sorry, Arthur choked out, reaching a trembling hand toward me. My boy, I and Appos. Am so sorry. I knelt by his wheelchair and took his cold, fragile hand in mine. It and Appos. S over, Dad, I said softly, the word feeling heavy and true in my mouth. I and Appos. Am taking you home. I signaled to my security detail. They entered the apartment, carefully lifting Arthur into a specialized transport chair, while another guard took Eleanor and Appos' small suitcases. As we walked out, Julian finally found his voice. Wait, he shrieked, desperate and pathetic. Where are you taking them? What about me? I and Appos? Am your brother. You have to help me. I stopped in the doorway. I turned my head slightly, looking at the biological heir standing in the ruins of his own making. You are not my brother, I said, my voice as cold as the Boston winter. You are a parasite, and your host has just moved on. Survive on your own, Julian. I walked out, leaving him alone in the freezing, rotting apartment. I placed Arthur and Eleanor into the warm, luxurious cabin of the Maybach. As the car pulled away, leaving the slums behind, I knew my adoptive parents were finally safe. But my business with the Sterling family was and Appos entirely finished. Victoria and Chloe still sat in their high towers, believing they had escaped the fallout. They were about to learn that karma has a very, very long memory. Victoria Sterling believed she was untouchable. Operating from her sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline, she watched the Sterling Corporation burn with a cold, detached superiority. She genuinely thought she had successfully severed herself from Julian's catastrophic failures. But arrogance is a blinding fog. Victoria had built her logistics firm on a foundation of fear, ruling her employees with the same tyrannical, suffocating dominance her father once used. She had zero loyalty from her staff. They stayed only for the paychecks. And her supposedly impenetrable financial wall had a massive, fatal crack. 2 years prior, when Julian was desperately trying to hide his initial massive losses, he had come to Victoria. He had threatened to leak devastatingly embarrassing information about her early, messy divorce to the tabloids, information that would have ruined her pristine corporate image. To shut him up, Victoria had secretly guaranteed a massive, high-interest bridge loan for him, using her logistics firm and Appos' core assets as collateral. She assumed Julian, with the entire Sterling empire behind him, would easily pay it off. She assumed wrong. When the federal bankruptcy courts tore through Julian's life, they found the loan guarantees. The creditors, denied their blood from the empty Sterling Corporation, turned their hungry eyes toward Victoria's highly profitable logistics firm. The collapse happened with terrifying speed. It was a Monday morning. Victoria arrived at her glass tower, coffee in hand, ready to scream at her executives for missing a minor deadline. Instead, she found the lobby swarming with federal auditors and aggressive corporate liquidators. What is the meaning of this? Victoria demanded, using her loudest, most authoritative voice. The lead liquidator didn't and Appos flinch. He handed her a thick stack of legal documents. Your brother defaulted on a $50 million loan, Ms. Sterling. As the primary guarantor, your company and Appos' assets are now the property of the creditor bank. We are shutting down operations. Victoria's iron facade shattered. She frantically called her top executives, her brilliant CFO, her ruthless legal team. Nobody answered, because she had treated her staff like disposable trash for years. The moment the ship started sinking, the rats didn't and Appos' just flee. They took the lifeboats. Her entire C-suite had resigned overnight, taking their golden parachutes and leaving her to face the firing squad alone. By Friday, Victoria was officially locked out of her own building. The woman who had proudly declared herself a self-made titan and refused to give her starving parents $200 was forced to file for personal bankruptcy. Her sports cars were repossessed. Her penthouse was seized. The Iron Queen was reduced to nothing. While Victoria's demise was a quiet, clinical corporate execution, Chloe's downfall was a spectacular, global public execution. Chloe's entire existence was a carefully curated, incredibly expensive lie. She wasn't an Appos' a singer. She was a product, and products only survive as long as the public likes the packaging. With her father's endless funding gone, Chloe's PR team, her producers, and her yes-men began to demand their delayed paychecks. When Chloe, completely disconnected from reality, threw a massive tantrum and told them they should be honored to work for Sterling, the loyalty evaporated. The betrayal came from her closest personal assistant, a young woman Chloe had verbally abused, overworked, and degraded for 3 years. The assistant didn't and Appos' sue her. She did something far more destructive. She leaked the raw, unfiltered reality of Chloe Sterling to the internet. A 15-minute compilation video went viral overnight. It featured hidden camera footage of Chloe screaming racial slurs at hotel staff, throwing hot coffee at a makeup artist, and, most damningly, a raw audio feed from her concert booth proving that she wasn't an Appos' just lip-syncing. She was using a completely different singer in Appos' heavily modified voice. The video also included irrefutable proof of her severe, illegal substance abuse in VIP club bathrooms. The internet, which had once worshipped her manufactured glamour, turned into a rabid, bloodthirsty mob. The cancel culture was absolute and merciless. Within 48 hours, her record label publicly terminated her contract, citing morality clauses. Her high-fashion sponsors dropped her instantly, demanding the return of millions of dollars in advanced endorsements. Streaming platforms pulled her music. Chloe barricaded herself in her luxury penthouse, watching in hysterical terror as the paparazzi and furious former fans swarmed the street below. But the final blow came from the bank. Because she hadn't and Appos' paid her astronomical mortgage in months. Assuming her label would cover it, the bank foreclosed on the property. She was physically escorted out of her penthouse through the service elevator, her face covered with a cheap hoodie, sobbing hysterically as the paparazzi cameras flashed blindingly in her face. The pampered, arrogant siren was completely silenced, left with a ruined reputation that no amount of money could ever repair. Desperation is a powerful equalizer. It stripped away the pride, the arrogance, and the expensive facades of the 3 biological heirs. Destitute, publicly disgraced, and living in cheap motels, Victoria, Chloe, and Julian finally realized they had nowhere left to run. Their friends ignored their calls. The elite society they once ruled treated them like infectious diseases. In their darkest hour, their twisted, entitled minds all landed on the same thought. Mom and Dad. They discovered, through the tabloids, that Arthur and Eleanor Warren and Appos' living in the slums anymore. They were living in a sprawling, ultra-secure, multi-million-dollar estate in the Hamptons. My estate. They thought it would be easy. They were the biological children, after all. They believed that if they just cried hard enough, played the victims, and manipulated their mother and Appos' soft heart, they would be welcomed back inside. They thought they could leech off my massive wealth just like they had leeched off Arthur's. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, the 3 of them arrived at the towering iron gates of my estate. They looked pathetic. Victoria and Appos' designer suit was stained and unpressed. Chloe looked gaunt and exhausted. Julian had a fresh black eye, likely from a bar fight he couldn't and Oppos. T by his way out of. They pressed the intercom, weeping and begging for their parents. Inside the estate, the security alarms chimed softly. I was sitting in the grand living room, reading a book by the fireplace, while Arthur and Eleanor sat on the plush sofa, drinking tea. I looked at the security monitors. The biological heirs were on their knees in the rain, pressing their faces against the iron bars. Eleanor saw the screen. Her hands trembled, making the teacup rattle against the saucer. The maternal instinct to save her children warred with the agonizing memories of how they had left her to starve in the freezing cold. Arthur reached over and gently placed his hand over Eleanor's. He didn't oppose. T look at the screen. He looked at me. His icy blue eyes were perfectly clear. He gave me a single, resolute nod. I stood up, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked out into the rain. When the three of them saw me walking down the long, paved driveway, they immediately started screaming my name, completely abandoning their past hatred, begging me to let them in, promising they had changed. I stopped 10 feet from the gate. I didn't oppose. T open it. I looked at them with the same cold, detached stare Victoria had given me on my first day at the orphanage. Ethan, please, Chloe sobbed, gripping the wet iron bars. We have nothing. We and Oppos. Re your family. You are a biological accident, I replied, my voice slicing through the sound of the rain. You are not my family, and you are certainly no longer theirs. I signaled to the heavily armed security guards standing in the gatehouse. I have already filed the paperwork. I told them, my tone absolute.
Permanent, irrévocable restraining order.
If any of you step within 500 yards of this estate, or attempt to contact Arthur or Eleanor in any way, my legal team will ensure you spend the next 10 years in a federal penitentiary for criminal harassment and elder abuse. Victoria, her pride finally completely broken, slumped against the gate, sobbing uncontrollably. Julian just stared at me, realizing the terrifying, unshakable truth. The boy he had tortured and framed was now the absolute master of his fate, and there would be no mercy. You reaped the harvest you planted, I said softly, turning my back on them. Now eat it. I walked back to the warmth of my home, the sound of their desperate wailing fading into the storm, forever locked outside my walls. The storm passed, giving way to a brilliant, golden twilight. I walked back into the living room, brushing the raindrops from my jacket. The silence in the house was no longer oppressive. It was a deep, profound peace. Arthur and Eleanor were sitting by the massive bay windows, looking out over the private beach as the sun dipped below the ocean horizon. They hadn't Oppos. T watched the monitors. They hadn't Oppos. T asked what I said to their children. I poured 3 glasses of Arthur and Oppos' favorite 20-year-old Macallan and walked over to them. I handed them the glasses and sat in the armchair opposite them. Eleanor took a slow sip. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't Oppos. T crying anymore. The grief of losing her biological children had finally given way to closure. They are gone, Arthur asked, his voice rough but steady. They are gone, I confirmed softly. They will never hurt you again. You are safe here, for as long as you live. Arthur looked down at his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light of the setting sun. He took a deep breath, the heavy weight of decades of mistakes finally lifting from his frail shoulders. I spent my entire life obsessed with blood, Arthur whispered, looking out at the ocean. I thought blood guaranteed loyalty. I thought blood meant greatness. I spoiled them, I poisoned them with entitlement, and I created monsters who would have happily watched me die for $1. He turned his wheelchair slightly, looking directly into my eyes. I bought a child because I wanted a tool, Arthur continued, his voice thick with emotion. But God, in his infinite mercy, gave me a son who stayed when the money burned, a son who returned for the father who had exiled him. Eleanor reached out, her warm, soft hand gently gripping my wrist. We love you, Ethan, more than words can ever say. You are our true blood. I smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached my eyes. The 12-year-old orphan who had felt entirely invisible finally felt seen. Years later, Arthur passed away peacefully in his sleep, holding Eleanor and Apos' hand, surrounded by the absolute luxury and love I had provided them. Eleanor lived out her remaining years tending to the sprawling gardens of the estate, happy and entirely at peace. As for Victoria, Chloe, and Julian, they faded into the dark, miserable obscurity of the city and Apos' lower class. They worked grueling, minimum-wage jobs just to pay rent, constantly looking over their shoulders, forever haunted by the staggering heights they had fallen from. They learned the brutal truth that when you value money over humanity, you end up bankrupt in both. I stood on the balcony of my estate, feeling the cool ocean breeze. I was no longer the silent boy in the shadows. I was the architect of my own destiny, the guardian of the parents who had finally learned how to love, and the undisputed master of an empire built not on entitlement, but on the unbreakable foundation of character.
I walk through fire in disguise, buried truth beneath their lies. But every scar became my code. Now I won't break, I just reload. The past won't hold me anymore. I'm not who I was before. From shadows I have found my name, a second chance, a brighter flame.